Welcome to Speaking in Spoons with your host, Christina Brookman.
Hi, welcome to Speaking in Spoons, a chronically ill podcast. I'm your host, Christina Brookman, with the handsome co-host, Dr. Nate Straus. And today we are talking about Social Security disability, which I know a lot of you out there will be excited to hear about and talk about. We have with us a special guest, Adriana de Torre from the Tower Law Group. Thank you for being here with us today, Adriana.
No, thank you so much. I'm happy to be here. You guys are doing some great stuff and making sure people get information. So I'm really happy to be here.
Thank you. Um, yeah, I've so enjoyed talking with you and seeing your posts. And I guess let's get in there. Oh God, my brain is just fried today. Sorry. How about you tell us a little bit about yourself and Tower Law Group and how you got into being an attorney for disability claims?
Yeah, I always knew that I was kind of going to be an attorney, and I thought I was going to do government work. And I went to law school, and my practice was going to be government work or nonprofit. So when I graduated from law school in 2006, I went to Chicago, and I was working for the Illinois Attorney General's office, where I got a crash course on how to do litigation. And then an opportunity arose at Social Security. And so I switched to work at Social Security. And when I was there, I was defending the judge's decisions. But after about 2 years there, I realized I think I can do something better. So my sister, who's also an attorney, we opened up our law firm in 2011, and we've been practicing these 13 years together. And we've done so much personally and professionally. It's been amazing. And so we just kind of want to continue to do more and help more people.
That's wonderful that you get to do it with your sister too. And you've gotten to see it from both sides, which I think is really interesting. Um, so I guess I'm gonna go right there and ask. I know a lot of people say there's, a lot of fraud in Social Security disability. What do you have to say to that?
So I don't think there really is a lot of fraud. Fraud has been a big buzzword for Social Security for a very long.
Yes.
And there's a lot of articles about it and things, but really the fraud numbers are extremely low. It was 2013. It was the commissioner was Michael Astro. And at that time, he said that less than 1% of cases were fraud cases, right?
Wow.
That is a long time. That was 10 years ago, but not much has changed because they have reports that they do all the time. So Social Security has what's
Right.
called the Office of the Inspector General. And what they do is they make reports on these were the fraud cases, these is what they prosecuted, and they do that every 6 months. So the last report that came out at this time was November 2003, right? So just a couple months ago. At that time, they said that there was only 530 federal and 99 state and local prosecutions for fraud. When you think of it in the context,
Wow.
how many cases Social Security handles, that is such a small percentage.
That's a blip.
It's almost as if it's not as big as what
Yeah,
people say. So
they
is there
really do.
Yes, like there is fraud, but it's really not out there in the numbers that people think they are.
Well, and I think I think people think it exists because you don't always know what's going on in somebody's life, and there are a lot of invisible disabilities, and people don't understand. It's why, like, I used to get when I would park in using my handicap placard, on days that I had my backpack for my port and I was getting an infusion and I was using a mobility device, no one gave me any flack. But on other days where I still needed it, I would get evil glares and even comments because they thought I had taken it from like a parent or a grandparent. So it's refreshing to know and have you tell people on our podcast, fraud really is not as rampant as people are thinking, because I think that validates a lot of those with invisible disabilities out there.
I think so. I mean, think of it in the context. So we've had a lot of cases where, it's a young woman and she'll say, I have migraines, depression, and anxiety. And she'll come to the office and say, I can't leave the house. When I have migraines, I can't even get out of bed. I don't like to drive places. I don't like to be around people, right? All those things are consistent with what she's saying. But then you see that, well, maybe she's got her nails done, right? They look really nice. So it looks like, well, she went somewhere to get it done. Immediately people think, well, she's not disabled. Look, that's exactly what she said that she's not doing. She's doing what she said she wasn't going to do. But
Right.
the problem is, if you ask a couple questions, it's not fraud. It's not that she's lying. It's that it's consistent. She probably went to go get her nails done because she spent 3 days in bed and couldn't get up because of a migraine. And then she started to feel better and wanted to do something so that she could
Yeah.
feel a little bit better. That's not fraud. That's actually pretty consistent with what she's saying, right?
Yeah.
So,
And you're allowed to it almost feels like when you have a disability and you're on disability, people want you to have absolutely no life. Not and that goes with some of the resources too. Like you can get rides, but only to a doctor. What
mhm,
about groceries? I mean, there are some minimal, like I love for Medicaid with groceries, you can get 25 or 32 rides for the year. And I was like, so I only get groceries 25 or 32 times. But yeah, like um that important socialization and getting out of the house and things like that, are that mental health too is part of your physical health, and
yeah,
vice versa, and mental health is also a legitimate invisible disability. What would you, because we could talk about this forever. I was just so excited to get to go to the dog park I was like crying going to the dog park the other day because I have a caretaker now who could take myself and my dog to the park, and watching him happy
that's
running
good.
around, I felt like a person again.
Yeah, that is great. That's
Yeah.
wonderful.
And I am a person. Like,
Yeah,
being disabled is part of who I am, but it's not all I am.
there's
So can
this
you, oh,
misconception.
sorry.
No, sorry, I could talk about this forever. There's just this misconception that they have to be a disabled person has to be bedridden. And there were a
Yes.
lot of cases in Social Security before, within the district court where they're talking about you don't have to be bedridden. I mean, you
Yeah.
can't be out climbing Mount Kilimanjaro. I'm on board with that. But what they're saying is you don't have to be bedridden. You can have a semblance of a life and it still be consistent with the definition of disability, right?
And there
So
are many conditions where you can be bedridden one day or one week, and then the next you're not. And that's the fluctuation of a lot of these, a lot of conditions, particularly conditions affecting women. But also like MS with Nate, he's got his fluctuations and things like that. So what is the definition of disability according to the federal government?
So, Social Security's definition of disability is you have a condition that prevents you from working either the job that you used to do or any job in the national economy. And the way that they break that down is it's a 5-step evaluation. It's actually really 6, but they've made a 3.5 step in there.
Uh-huh.
So so they look at several factors to see if you can do a job. What they're looking to see is what can you do, right? In order to become disabled by Social Security purposes, what they're looking at is can you stand? Can you walk? Can you sit? How much can you lift, right? So they're looking at those physical requirements of a job. They also look at the psychological components of it, the mental components of What kind of work are you doing? Can you concentrate at that job long enough? How do you do with change and routine work settings? And so they consider all those things and say, well, based on this, you either can't do any jobs or can, and these are the 3 jobs that we think you can do, or occupations that you should be able to perform.
And I know we can't go too much into this because it would be its own episode, but I would love you to share what you were sharing online about how they get that list of jobs.
So there's always going to be, when you get denied, you file an application. Once you get denied, you go to reconsideration. That's still within the local office area. Then
Okay.
you go to the stage where you get denied, you go to an administrative law judge hearing. And there you get to sit down with the judge. Now, Social Security brings what's called a vocational expert. That is a person who's going to talk about jobs, what jobs there are in the economy, how many jobs there are, what would be limitations that would preclude working. So that person, that vocational expert, is also at the hearing. So what happens is the judge will come up with a hypothetical that says, based on what I find this person can do, A, B, C, and D, are there any jobs that the claimant could do? Then the vocational expert will say, yes, there's these 3 jobs, representative jobs. The vocational expert uses what's called the Dictionary of Occupational Titles. That was from the Labor Department. They created this book about what jobs there are. And this was created a very long time ago in the 70s and 60s. And some of these jobs have not been updated since 1977 or 79. So we are missing what the current market is, like what these
Right.
jobs are. So they'll have some jobs that they try and relate to. Well, nowadays, there's this many jobs of that. And that's been a big sticking point for Social Security. And I hope that the new commissioner really addresses that problem, because to find somebody, there's a cutter paster job, which is the one that I dislike the most. Okay.
Okay.
It's basically a job where you sit somewhere and you cut out of magazines and you paste them and you itemize those. That's not a full-time job anymore. The
No.
job is
And it also, to my understanding, it doesn't have to be a job that's offered within where you live. Like you would have to, if the job exists anywhere in the United States, bam, you're not disabled.
They look at national numbers. They look at those jobs to see if there is a job that exists in significant numbers. Nobody has defined significant numbers. The courts have interpreted significant numbers to mean different things. But, if you just say, well, 20,000, okay, well, that seems like a lot. But 20,000 in the context of all the jobs in the nation, that's not even 1%. How is that significant? So, as I said, it's a very complex problem that is probably its own TED Talk for another day.
But one we will have. But it also leads me to who am making these decisions. Like you talked about the different steps. You file your application. If there's the denial, then you have the appeal, and then there's multiple levels of appeal. So that initial step, who's making that decision?
It's made by a couple of people, actually. So when you decide you're going to file for disability, you go to your local Social Security office, right? And they will take your application, they'll get all your information, and they'll get your medical records, a list of them. What happens is it gets referred to the state agency. The state agency will then get your medical records. They have a list of doctors that they use who review records and make opinions. They will send you to one of their doctors to give you a consultative examination, right? And they will see what they think. So they're not just going to rely on your records. They're going to rely on what the state agency doctors are also saying. So then what happens is they will take those 2 pieces of information and the state agency will say, well, based on this, right? Based on these findings, based on these medical records, based on these statements, we think they can do A, B, C, and D. And if they can, then given these rules, they're not disabled. So
Okay.
that happens initially. When you get a denial, right? If you get paid, if you get awarded benefits, great, you start getting your payments.
How
But
frequent is that? Is it hard to get awarded in that initial phase?
it's harder than people think. So the Social Security tracks a lot of this information, and the last numbers that they released were from 2022. And those numbers show that there's about 60 something percent of cases are denied at the initial application level.
Wow.
So the odds are already against you that
Yes.
you're gonna
The
get
odds are
approved.
not in your favor.
No, no, no. The odds are not in your favor. And so you're already pretty much gonna get denied at that stage. So, but that's they're making that initial determination. Does that make sense?
Right. It does, yeah. And is there like a difference in age groups or conditions? Like I've
There's
heard that it is easier once you get older, like 50 past. Is that something that is
there
accurate or inaccurate?
There are some special rules that are applied to certain age categories. And the reason is because what they're saying is it's going to be harder for them to make adjustments to other work.
Ah,
It's gonna be harder for them to enter into that market, right? So when you
gotcha.
get to 50, there's some different rules. 55, different rules. 60, different rules. But it's the same definition of disability for everybody.
Okay, that makes sense. Because a lot of the people I speak to are probably in that younger category. What they're consider, I remember disability telling me I was young, and I was like, "What? I'm not young. I feel so old." But
Yeah.
by that standard, I'm young, and I had worked before, so I actually didn't even see a doctor. Um, it was just flat out denied, and then I had my appeal. What do
That
you
is
think? Is that
that
common?
happen. That can happen because of either staffing issues or they just feel we have enough information. If you're under 50, so 49 and younger, you're called a younger individual, right?
Yeah,
That definition, younger individual.
I was
Um,
31, and I was like, I'd hit 30, and I was like, I am not young anymore.
yeah.
Um, what do you think is the biggest mistake that you see in people in their applications? Or like some tips you could give for people that are in the application process?
I think the biggest issue I find with a lot of people when they file their initial application is that they think or believe that the records will speak for themselves, right?
Yeah,
They think that because they have this MRI, well, then that should be enough. They should know Social Security. Sorry, I just stuttered there. I don't know why. Social Security should
okay,
just understand what
right,
their condition is and what it's like. That's not the case, right? Because everybody, it's a subjective process, right? You look at this MRI and you say, okay, based on this MRI, I think this person can do A, B, C, or D. Well, somebody else might look at it and say, oh, can't do that. They can only
right,
do these three things. So it's a subjective process. So a lot of people think, well, I'm good, right? Of course, it says it in my medical records. That's not going to be what's going to get you the disability. You need to connect the dots. You need to show the condition, but you also need to show what your limitations are. How does it affect you? And how does it affect you every day, right? Not just good days, not just bad days, but every day. What is a typical day like? And I think that's where a lot of people miss the connection.
right. And do they how would you go about doing that? Like in the application, is it do they write letters? Like what are some strategies for that?
So part of filing the application is you provide all of your doctor's records, right? Or your doctor's
Right.
list and your medications, right? I remember you go through that, right?
Yeah.
one of the other things that they do is that they'll send you a questionnaire, and that questionnaire will be like, do you cook? Do you clean? Do you do laundry? Right? Like, what is a typical day like for you? And that's where you get the opportunity to really lay the foundation of what it's like for you every day, right?
Right.
Not just the good days, not just bad days, but every day. And you have to detail your problems.
Yeah.
And, does it, yes, I can cook is very different than yes, but, right? It's a
Right.
sandwich. And sometimes I can't stand, and I've dropped the plates before, and I can't do this or I can't do that. So if
And
you
cooking for me is microwaving, or if I cook this day, then I'm out 3 days, kind of thing.
Correct. So if you just say yes, well, that's not the whole picture, right? You
Right.
need the explanation that comes with it, what they can't see and what you're not going to get in the medical records.
That makes sense. Like I like the sandwich component, that visual of that, the sandwich.
Yeah, I'm not,
Um,
yes, I'm making a 3-course meal, 7-course meal. Those are very different than just, I made a sandwich, I microwaved some soup, right? Like
yeah,
it's not the same level, but you can't assume that they would know that they would
right.
understand what cooking means to you.
And I think a lot of people are scared. I know I was scared of, and I've talked other people, like they don't want to get in trouble, so they don't want to leave anything out and like put, no, I don't cook, when it's like, yes, I do cook sometimes, but everybody has, like, I have to have other people do the prep. I have to sit on my rollator. I might pass out, or then I'm out for 3 days. Like, and that's the stuff that you're saying is vital to include.
Yeah.
And that I know, like, I didn't want to get in trouble for like doing activity. Like, are there, someone had told me, be very careful what you post on Facebook. Is that something to watch out for? Like, are there like social security spies out there watching everybody's Facebook? But also maybe there's a explanation of, is it easy to misinterpret people's Facebook? I don't know.
So the agency has some rules about Facebook. And for example, judges are not supposed to look up claimants, right? So that is true. However, if a case gets flagged for fraud, right,
Okay.
then they will be looking at the whole picture. Okay. They have some investigators that will come out to the place to look at things. Now, is that very rare? Yes, but still does happen. I think for most people who are afraid of, I don't want to say this, or what if they know? And my answer is always, you got to give them the truth. And trust me,
Yeah.
your truth is enough, because
Yeah.
you just have to give them the explanations, right? You just have to give them the details. And I guarantee you it's enough. Why? This is how you live. You are
Yeah.
struggling with this. And it will be enough for you to just tell them everything that's going on.
Could you share with us, maybe, like, you had told me that we were talking about long COVID and POTS, and how you said that those are the new fibromyalgia. Could you explain that a little bit? Like the cases
So
that you're seeing?
yeah. So when I started back at Social Security, we're talking about 2008. And there was at that time a lot of misconceptions about fibromyalgia, right? It wasn't common knowledge of tender points, and how many tender points, and where are the tender points, and how often do you have to have tender points, right?
Right.
So there was a lot of misconception about that. And what happened is sometimes some judges would come in with an idea in their head about what fibromyalgia is. So then there were a lot of court cases that was saying, this is what fibromyalgia is. This is how many tender points. This is what it needs to be. And then in 2012, Social Security issued a ruling, and they will do this periodically. They're called SSRs, Social Security ruling. And they are explanations and guidelines on how to evaluate this condition, how to understand this condition. And so back in 2012, they issued a ruling specifically to address fibromyalgia. So it's SSR 12-2P. So if you're ever kind of bored at night and you're like, well, let me just see what this is, it just provides the guidance as to how fibromyalgia should be considered. Now, they've done that for other conditions too.
Incredible, because I know I've heard through Birdie of an ER doctor that says that fibromyalgia is not real. And I'm like,
and that's why people need guidance on it, right?
yes.
Social Security, actually, they've issued them before. So they did one for
Yeah.
chronic fatigue syndrome. They've done one for complex regional pain syndrome. So they've done them before on them. I think it won't be very long before we get one on long COVID. I think we won't.
Yeah.
I think we'll get one most likely on POTS as well. POTS, not, well, yes, but
I hope there's one on EDS. I know that the Ehlers-Danlos community is trying to work on getting it added into the list of conditions. Because there's a lot of misinformation out there about Ehlers-Danlos and
Yeah.
how it affects. But I think back to the sandwich issue too, the reason it's so important to put what experiences are like for you, and because Nate and I are learning more and more about this, is each individual, just because you have MS or you have Ehlers-Danlos doesn't mean your experience is the same as somebody else who has it. So
Right.
somebody with Ehlers-Danlos could be disabled by federal guidelines and somebody else is not. It doesn't mean, and same with multiple sclerosis. And it doesn't mean that they're not dealing with a chronic condition, a disabling condition. It's just they have not yet met the standards of federal disability.
I think it's easy to view it kind of like on a spectrum, right?
Right.
So if you view it as a line, you have depression. There are people with depression who work, and then there are people with depression who can't. So where do you fall within this line? And that is basically shown by your limitations. What are the things that it prevents you from doing? And most of that is on a day-to-day basis.
How helpful are doctors' letters or letters from people like that spend time with you?
I think that that's almost two different questions, right? I
Okay.
think letters from people that spend time with you, I think are amazing. Why?
Really?
They are going to be the ones who see you all the time. They can
Yeah.
put in details in there that corroborate what you're saying. They can
Right.
put as many, and you can submit as many of those as you'd like. And I always say, paper the file, like put as many statements in there. They cannot turn them away, right? So
Nice.
submit as many as you can. Now, when it comes to doctor statements, I think it's a bit of a tricky issue, right? Because a doctor statement that just says this person is disabled, that doesn't get you anywhere, right? The agency says, well, that definition, that finding is left to us. It's not left to your doctor. So a blanket statement of the claimant is disabled, my patient is disabled, does not actually get you disability benefits. The statement of my patient can't stand for more than 15 minutes without a cane, that's what we're talking about, right?
Okay.
Those are going to be the statements that help the disability application. And then, yes, those are fantastic, right? The agency has to consider those. They have to weigh it. They have to apply a bunch of factors to this opinion to see if it's supported. Is it consistent? And then that can help you get disability benefits. But there is a big difference and a big disconnect between while the doctor saying she's disabled and the doctor saying she can't do A, B, C, and D, right? Those
Right.
basic job tasks. That's what's important.
And my brain just went. I
That's okay.
I
I am throwing so much information
no,
at
I
you.
I love it though. I'm learning a lot, and I know that those out there watching and listening are learning a lot too. And I'm like, we just need to keep having more of these. I'm excited because I think there's a lot of people out there in pain and struggling. And when you're, I know when I went through the process myself, like it's exhausting. Like it's exhausting. And um it you're at a loss, like you don't know what to do. And so I really appreciate you helping provide some insight into that. Could you help people kind of understand your role in what you do in appeals, and you're at the federal level, correct?
Yes, that's what
Which I
I,
didn't even know existed. I was like, what? So that's kind of cool to learn. So could you talk to that? And then also if you have a case story that you could share with us, um, we'd love to hear anything that could be helpful.
yeah. So let me explain. I know we talked about it a little bit before, but let me explain the process of the application, right? So you
Yes.
file the application, and if you get denied, then you have to go to reconsideration. That's the stage where you're basically telling the local office, no, you got it wrong, do it again. That's what
Yeah.
reconsider is. But that's about an 85% denial rate.
Wow.
So then you go to the administrative law judge, and that's where you have that hearing that I talked about, where you sit down with the
Hmm.
judge, you get to submit your records, you tell your side of the story. Okay. That part, that's where you have the administrative law judge hearing. They issue a decision. It's usually a pretty long decision. It's about like 15 so pages or so. And what they're doing is saying, this is all the evidence that I see, and these are my findings. Now, in that, the 2022 numbers show that 51% are denied. So you have basically a 50-50 shot at getting approved at that ALJ level, okay? Then from there, you go to the appeals council. The appeals council is the body of judges above those individual judges who heard your case. And they make a decision about whether or not they agree with the judge or not. If they agree with the judge, that's when you come to me. At that point, you've exhausted
All your appeals.
all your options in front of the agency, right? The
Okay.
agency has now said, we're done with your application, where there's nothing left to do in front of us. So then you have to go to federal court. And that's where you go to the US District Court and you file a complaint and you sue Social Security. And what you say is, hey, this is what they had, this is what they said, and here's why it's wrong. So now you have somebody outside of Social Security looking at your case, because all those 4 steps earlier were all Social Security. It was their local office. It was the Social Security administrative law judge. It was Social Security's appeals council, right? So up
Right.
until now, it's only been Social Security. So you have to get out of Social Security in order to sometimes get any kind of fair shot at your disability case.
I feel for the people that are going to that level, because that's why I love that you're explaining this to people, not just for those going through it, but for their families and loved ones, and maybe naysayers out there, to help them understand, if you get disability, you are disabled. It is
Yeah,
a hard process to go through. It is a very, very hard process. And just because you were denied does not mean you are not disabled. Um,
correct. And
yeah,
that's what I always want to tell my clients a lot is Social Security gets things wrong all the time, right? They get things wrong all the time. The district court remands, which means, so the district court will not find you disabled, right? When you go to federal court, they're not going to say you're disabled or not. What they're going to say is, we think the judge got it right, or we think the judge got it wrong. If the judge got it wrong, the case goes back to Social Security for a do-over, right? You get a remand. Case goes back to Social Security and you get a new hearing. You get to submit new evidence. you get to do all those things. The
Okay.
2022 numbers show that 58% of the cases filed in federal court are remanded back to the agency. So
Wow.
of the cases, Social Security got something wrong. Either they didn't consider something they should have considered, either they didn't apply the right standard, they did something wrong, and now they have to fix it. They have to do it again. Now, it's not
Wow.
a guarantee that you'll get disability if you win in federal court and go back to Social Security, but you're in a much better position than you were before.
And when you're in the federal court, you can only use, like, as their lawyer, you can only use what was used in the case that was denied at the local level.
Yeah, you can only use what was in the file, right? So you
Okay.
can't fault the judge for not considering something they didn't have, right?
Right.
That's not fair. But everything that's in the file, all the statements that you make, all the doctor's reports that you submit, all the family and friends statements that go in there, all of that, fair game. That's what they consider. And they have to
Okay.
look at all the evidence.
And that's why it is so important to sandwich and pack that file with statements.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but then if at your level, like the judge is found to be incorrect and it goes back, they can then go, okay, let's get some more statements if maybe they
Right.
didn't have anything. That's
Now you have
wow.
an idea as to
Yeah,
why the judge denied you, right? Because they wrote this
yeah,
page
this is
decision
why.
that details why we
Yeah,
think I'm disabled. So then you can now take that and say, well, wait a minute, I have an answer to that. And oh, I have an answer to
answer
that.
to that.
And here's my evidence for that, right? And so
It's
you're
so exhausting to be constantly defending your truth, you
yes.
know,
And it's time consuming, right? Because
time
this
consuming.
process, like somebody who files an application doesn't get to me in federal court for like 3 years
Yeah.
before they get to me in federal court. So it's a long process. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint.
And I know they're behind right now because of COVID too, like in the applications and the like all of that
Yeah.
is
The
currently
processing time
behind.
have gone up right now. The processing times are about like 220 days from when you file your application to when you get a decision. So you're talking 6 to 7 months on average. 6
Wow.
to 7 months from when you're going to get a decision at the
Yeah,
initial application stage.
at the initial.
And then
And I
it
know
just
for me it was like it felt forever because
yeah.
and I was denied, and then I was blessed that I had a advocate take my case for an appeal, and was lucky enough we got it the in the appeal. And I physically couldn't go to the in person because I was having such problems with the lights and the and smells and things, which we didn't even know at that point that I had hemiplegic migraines. We didn't know what was causing it. Uh, but do you have a case that you could talk about?
Well, we did recently win a POTS case in federal court. It was sent
Yes.
to the agency because the ALJ erred in evaluating the case, right? So I'm sure your listeners know, but POTS is the postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, right? It is often misdiagnosed, not found for years, affects mostly women, right? But
Mhm.
it can be debilitating. It causes
Very.
lightheadedness, fainting, fatigue, but not every second of every day,
Yeah.
day in, day out, right? So there are conditions where it's going to wax and wane. And so, because of that, and because we felt that the judge kind of just didn't really understand the condition, we set out medical journals and a lot of studies. There was one study that talked about specifically POTS and working abilities. And it
Yes.
was a study about like 5,500 women. We set that out in there and said, This is not some sort of made up, she doesn't want to work, right? Because
Yeah.
what was the judge considering? The judge was looking at normal findings. He looked at her gait. That has nothing to do with this. He looked at her range of motion. That had nothing to do with this, right?
She probably had a really good range of motion because it's usually associated with Ehlers-Danlos, and yeah.
Exactly. So what were the exams and testing was showing tachycardia, exactly what it needed to be showing.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, it wouldn't lead to the symptoms that you're saying or the limitations that you're saying. So we were able to prevail on that, you know? And one of the other things that the ALJ focused on temporary improvement. They were like focusing on the ability to do certain things and said, well, you got better. Okay, but if you look at this in the longitudinal picture, if you look at the whole
Yeah.
story, it's not getting better. And so
Yes.
we prevailed on that. So it's really about setting out the foundational evidence, and then that's how we were able to prevail in that case. And I'm just so happy that we could, because it was a lot of research to put in this document about all these studies, and this is what the
Yeah.
Harvard Medical Journal talks about, and this is how they diagnose this. Don't be looking at range of motion, right? Don't be
That's
looking.
incredible. Because Dysautonomia International is actually going to be on, and I think their episode both airs before this, but to talk about dysautonomia, POTS, and long COVID. And so to know that you guys just won that is very incredible.
Yeah, I was really happy, and she was so thrilled, because it really is like when they get that notice, they've been fighting this for years, right?
Yeah,
They get that notice, it's like, oh man, somebody believed me, right? Like
validation.
good. And so I'm happy that we can help.
Well, and I'm sure you're hearing a lot of those cases like the POTS and the fibro and the long COVID where people don't think it's real,
Yeah.
and it is very, very real. And this is why I posted something the other day to someone who was saying, well, we shouldn't say disability as if disability is a bad word. And I think for some people they feel that way. But for people that are disabled according to federal it has taken time and blood and sweat and tears to get that validation, and that label is sometimes it's just very validating. Yes, now people will believe me that I am experiencing these things. And there is a reason I can't go to a family function sometimes, or there is a reason I cannot work. I'm not lazy. And I think that is a huge misconception, that disabled people or people on disability don't want to work, that they're lazy.
I think it's viewing it in the negative kind of connotation, right?
Yeah.
Like you're disabled, well, then that's a bad thing.
Yeah.
It's not, it is, and that's what this program is for. And that's what I always tell my clients. I don't have anybody who's ever excited to file for disability. I have yet to meet somebody who's like,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm a file for disability. No,
How much money I'm going to be raking in.
they are reluctant to do it. It is a
Yeah.
last resort, but that's what this program is for. It's for when bad things happen, so
Yeah.
that you can get a lifeline, right? So that you can still maintain the food and the housing and the clothes to live because of your conditions. So, that's why I like to be able to help people when I can. And when I can look at their case and I'm like, yeah, this is wrong. And they're like, and there's been a lot who are like, you can go ahead, take the case, but Social Security already told me 4 times that I'm not disabled, so I'm kind of giving up. And I'm like, just let me see what I can do. let me see what I can do. And then if we can win the case, they're like, oh my goodness. And I'm like, see, if you had just had that before, you would have been with me back there.
You're doing a wonderful thing, and we really appreciate you being here today. Nate, did you have any follow-up questions?
I mean, I've been listening the whole time, and I mean, to me, I want to say like I'm a little jaded by the system, but I mean, I think in your talk today, it seems so obvious that the system is not like disability is so much bigger than it was 3 decades ago, and we're still functioning on a system that was put in place and hasn't really changed a lot in the course of 30 plus years. And then to layer on top of that, like there's this assumption that the person that's disabled is bedridden or to the most part unable to function as a normal human being, but at the same time a demand on that person to file in a level that exceeds like a postdoctoral sort of submission for why I'm disabled. There's this sort of an ironic, like I just it's just a
I think
weird.
there's assumption that people have family that can take the time to do this. And I mean, it is, like you said, just
Right.
such a time encompassing
But
energy
that
sucking.
also assumed that also assumes that a family knows enough to be able to
True.
help their disabled person, like that they have an understanding of the system that is just not really apparent. And I think that's why a lot of people turn to law firms. I know me personally, I'd been denied like 3 times. I'm finally working with a law firm, but they kept denying working with me because I was too young, like Christina said. So it's been this like upward, because I mean, I feel like I would have had an easier time filing for disability when I was less disabled, but it's harder. Like I'm even more disabled now than I was 10 years ago. And I'm like, it should be more evident that I am disabled to the government. But it's like you said, that it's not apparent, and they have no way to really see you unless you show them.
Yeah.
What's interesting about the agency is that you can file without an attorney, right? You don't need to have
Right.
an attorney, you don't need to have a representative. But here's the problem, because they have these really specific rules and things have to mesh in a certain way for them to understand your story, it's usually best to have an attorney. It's a personal decision whether you go with an attorney or not, but it's usually
Right.
best to have an attorney because they know the deadlines, right? If this is what they do, they know the deadlines and what Social Security is going to ask you so that you can be prepared to respond, so that you know what's going to happen. And I think a lot of people can sometimes get a little bit concerned. They're like, well, I can't afford an attorney. And the great thing about disability is that most attorneys, they're not going to get paid unless you get disability benefits, right?
Right.
So
Right.
they're advocating for you, and they're not advocating in this vacuum. Their goal is to get you on disability benefits. So there is that safety net. Like if you never get it, well, your attorney doesn't get paid, right? So
And they get paid from the benefits, correct?
Yeah, they want to get you the disability because otherwise they're just working for nothing.
so the way that the agency, and they've regulated this, so the way that the agency pays attorneys is that there's called back pay. Back pay is money when you're found disabled. It's money that you should have been getting when you filed for disability and when you became eligible, because those are 3 different time periods, right?
Mm.
So there is you should have been getting checks starting this day. From that day to the present, there's what's known back pay, and that's where your attorney will get paid from. It's 25%, or right now, because they just increased the cap, it's 25% or $7,200. So your attorney will get paid from that fee, and that's it. There's nothing that you're not writing them a check. Social Security
Right.
will pay them directly from the back pay. So you're not writing them a check or paying for things out of pocket. So that's why it's important to make sure you know when you became disabled. When did you become eligible for disability benefits? Because these are all different days and they can all make an impact on your case.
Yeah.
Right.
How do you decide when you became disabled if it's kind of a progressive thing?
Yeah, good question.
It's usually depending on when did you stop working, right? The first threshold question for Social Security, if they're looking at your application, is, are you making money, right? Are you doing something and making money for it? If you are, then they kind of don't get to the rest of the steps. So you can't be working and also filing for disability. They're never going to get to look at your conditions. They're going to
Gotcha.
stop at the step one issue, which is, are you making substantial gainful activity? And that changes every year based on inflation and COLA. So that will kind of go up every year.
Okay, that makes
Mm.
sense.
So it's part of the same sort of identifying criteria that kind of exists on the spectrum of like, it's more of a, I know for me personally, like I didn't just become disabled. It was a slow progression of me needing more and more accommodations to the point where I finally was like, I can't do this anymore. So it's just like where in that are you disabled? I think it's like sort of a blurred.
And that's how most people are, right? It's not the massive car accident where you immediately lose
Right.
lower legs and that's not the majority of the cases. The majority of cases are these progressive conditions that just kept getting a little bit worse and a little bit worse. And then this medication didn't work, and then this treatment didn't work. And then you kind of get to the point where this is not working. I think if you don't have a work history to link it to, like, this is the day they fired me because of my conditions, then I think what we're talking about is then you're looking at the medical records and you're making kind of like a determination of, well, when did it start to get really bad, right? When did the MRI happen that showed this is why it got really bad? Or what was the blood work that came back and showed, well, this makes sense as to why you're having these symptoms. So that's why having an attorney can help you piece that story together. You know the information, right? It's your life. You've lived
Right.
it, right? And it's just kind of piecing it in the way that Social Security needs to hear it.
So it's important
Right.
too to find a good lawyer, as
Yeah. Make sure you have your records in order as well.
Yeah.
To send to your lawyer. Yeah, no, I do think that the law has sort of, I mean, not, I don't know if intentionally, like set up in a way where you get like representing yourself like in a court of law would be just as foolish as trying to do this without the help of some sort of, person more learned.
Yeah, I think so. I would not do this process. Well, I mean, even though I do this process, I would not do this process without an attorney. Why? They know the system. Now, the system is set up to be non-adversarial, right? It's a quasi-administrative judicial setting. It's supposed to be non-adversarial. But I'll tell you, when you get to federal court, it's pretty adversarial.
Not intentionally adversarial, but it kind of, I don't know. Like you could also blame this on the 1% of people trying to cheat it. That because of these bad apples, the system has to be much more like tough. I mean, not because the numbers are so high, but because every so often a fish gets through the net.
But that happens with everything, right? There's always going to be a couple of outliers in there, and that's just how it usually is in all aspects, right?
Well, with these cases of fraud, is it people that were never disabled to begin with, or maybe they started to get better and then that was not caught on and they kept the disability?
Well, Social Security does periodic reviews. There's usually a continuing disability review, and that happens every 3 years or so. The younger you are, the more likely you're going to get on that schedule of them checking up on you every 3 years. I think in some cases, it's mostly the fraud cases are somebody has passed away that was getting benefits, and then nobody continued to tell Social Security, and these benefits continued. That is an example of
the example of a bad apple cheating the system is the dead person. Like
And
that's even more evidence that something is not.
But that's good to know, like to put out there that like fraud really isn't happening the way people think it is. And I watched a documentary about disability cases in West Virginia, I believe, or somewhere, and that doctor and then the social services office gave this like they interviewed this guy and lawyer and all this stuff, and they were saying how rampant fraud is and all of this stuff. And I was like, but it's not.
I mean, how hard is it to get on disability? As you've seen it, it's really hard to get on
Right.
disability.
Really
You're
hard.
telling me that just people with nothing are just, oh, here we go. Like they're getting
Yeah.
checked.
But is the reason it's so difficult is because like say election fraud, like the reason there's really not a lot of election fraud is because the bar is so high to do that people wouldn't even bother.
I don't know. Is
And
that a
but
chicken or an egg situation?
right. Like is the system so hard because of that, or is the system so hard and that's why it's so small?
I think
Or
people
both?
also have a gross misunderstanding of what you get when you get disability. Like
Sure.
they think that you're getting way more money than you are.
I mean, think about it. SSI, right? So
Yeah.
just there, if you don't mind me continuing on
No,
the
please, yes.
Mhm.
main two types of programs within the disability program with Social Security, right? So they have both the same definition of disability. The difference is where is the money coming from, right? So the first type is called disability insurance benefits. That's Title II. So you were working, you were putting into the system so that if you became disabled, they'd say, well, you've worked long enough, we'll give you disability benefits. The second type is supplemental security income. That is Title 16, that's SSI. And that is, well, you don't have a work history, but you are disabled. So because your income is low, we'll give you disability benefits, right? That check, a full disability check for SSI is like $900 for the month. And from there, you're supposed to pay rent, food, transportation, your medication, cost of living, right?
Right.
There's not this, people are getting really wealthy on disability. It's
Yeah.
basically, as you said, it's just giving you enough to get by when something bad happens. So that's why, I don't see it as there is this massive amount of fraud because it's really so hard and it's
It's
only
very hard to live off disability. Like
yes.
you
Yeah.
get
Right.
good insurance, and you get good, it opens you up to resources, but like it depends on where you live in regards to housing, and if that housing is available, like,
Right.
because you could get income-based housing, but where I live, there is very little of that and very little of that in safe areas or
And
near.
there's a lot of wait lists,
Yeah,
right? And
lots of wait.
you
Wait
have a
lists are
condition.
4 years.
Right. Now, there's also a lot of SSI individuals also get food stamps, but food
Yeah,
stamps isn't that much either, right? So
and
it's
they just got cut.
great.
Yeah,
So it's not like they're living these luxurious lives.
no.
It's really just making sure that they have a roof over their head, food on
Mhm.
their table, and clothes on their back. Right. And that's why it's very
And we
frustrating.
still have to even fight for that. Mostly it's good insurance.
Right. I do know a lot of claimants come and they're like, because somebody else is working within the household, right? And
Yeah,
so their statement is, well, my husband works, so I don't necessarily need the monetary payment, but I need the Medicare, right? I
yeah,
need the treatment. And
yeah.
Right.
that's the difference for a lot of people.
And it also opens up, you can now get caretakers,
Right.
which are qualify for that. You can before, but it's much easier, like Medicaid waivers and things like that. But there's the whole, I remember when I was getting it, she's like, you want to make enough to get Medicare, qualify for Medicare, but also be poor enough to get the secondary of the Medicaid. And fortunately, I was poor enough and made enough. But it's still, but then you're poor enough. You're poor enough.
Right. Right. So it's like
So
win-win. Yay.
yay,
Like
I'm very, 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 very. So I'm just a little bit above that SSI mark. And it's very, and but I have family that are on SSI. And it's very hard. But it's still, it's like that's why this is here to help you. And that's why I get very upset when people talk about people cheating the system or fraud, or they don't really have disability. I'm like, you have no idea how hard it is to get disability, and improve that you have a legitimate condition. Like,
And that's
no
why
idea.
I always tell the claimants who come to me after they've been denied several times, it's don't give up. Let me see what I can do, right? I may not be able to win, right? There may be some arguments that I make that the court's like, no, we just don't see it. Okay, but at least we try,
Yeah.
right? You can't ever give up with disability. You just got to keep going until you find that one person within the agency that finds you disabled.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Adriana. I really appreciate you coming today, and we'll have to have you back. This has been an incredible discussion, and I've learned so much. And it was just nice to see you again.
I know. I'd love to come back. This was a lot of fun. I like it.
Good. Well, then those that are listening and watching, stay tuned, because Nate and I will do our after party discussion, and save your spoons. And we're back for an after party with Dr. Straus and myself, Christina Brookman, your host. So, Nate, that was a lively discussion. What do you think?
Yes, I learned a lot. I learned a lot, especially going through disability and just like all the stuff you don't know, and all the stuff you don't know, I think is the hardest part of anything. Like, it's just all the little pieces of this that you didn't really understand, and the pieces that it just felt to me like the system is too big, and the system that runs that system is antiquated, and it's
Very.
not, it's just not built to keep up with what is happening.
Yeah, well, and you've said this a lot about how people's conditions are changing and evolving, that we are in a you know, society is having more and more autoimmune conditions and progressive kind of conditions. And but I also thought it was interesting that she said that a lot of the people that are applying for disability and that are like disabled, at the federal level of, I cannot work 40 hours a week, like I cannot not make a living wage at 40 hours a week, or most, it is hard to make a living wage anyways these days. But
Right.
I physically cannot work 40 hours a week, either due to a physical disability or to an invisible mental health disability. She said that it is statistically more those people with the progressive disorders like us and the chronic illnesses, and not necessarily what you would think of with the car accident and the like the car accident and the immediate paralysis kind of thing. And that actually surprised me. I don't know why it surprised me, but it did.
Oh, well, because of the highest rates of mortality is not accidental. Like, so
Right.
most people getting sick, heart disease, obesity, chronic illness, like those are the top. Like, so
Right.
getting in a car accident, it happens, but it's rare, and it's probably going to become more rare as cars get automated. Like, it's
That
just,
would be cool.
it will be cool. Like, I was going to sidetrack about Elon Musk and the Cybertrucks, but like, it's just, I just, for me personally, I think it's just, well, the system hasn't kept, like we talked about pay, like it doesn't pay that much, and I don't think that amount of pay really has kept up with inflation.
It
Like,
it
it's
changes every year. Like I started at a certain amount, and like it raises every year with the cost of living. But the
right,
amount that I started with, because I'm on the SSDI, not the SSI, like it's based on the amount of years. I don't know how they get it's the amount of years I worked and the money of taxes I put into the system. I always chose to put like take it all out just so that I wouldn't mess anything up for the IRS, because I've always been a little paranoid. I was like, just take it all out and then I either get a check back or, whatever. And I've been working since I also got checks when I was a kid, because I did um
Social
I but
Security.
well, no, I didn't get social. No, sorry. I did theater when I was a kid and I was paid. But I don't know if my first job was when I was 16.
Oh, did you fill out a W-2 when you got paid as a kid? Like, it just,
I
does
don't
that count? Or
remember. I don't know
I
if
don't
I
even know
made
if you have
enough.
to be certain. I don't know if you have to be a certain age to even file for
That's like
work.
a whole other, I
That's
have no
child
idea, because
labor.
I was like 10 or 11.
That's
But
child labor. You can't work as a child.
well, you can. I did at 16. That's technically a child.
No, 16 is probably the cutoff. Like 16
Yeah,
legally an adult.
yeah. Um, I
But
think it
yeah,
was
younger than
considered like and I wasn't making up. Well, they do things with child performers, like you see kids on TV
yeah,
and they
yeah,
do.
yeah. I don't know how that works or whether they have to have a representative through their
It
guardians
was my
or
parents. My
right.
parents were my rep. But
Or we get
but
big sides here.
we're very sidetracked. But I guess my point is, I think a lot of people don't realize how important their taxes are. The taxes they pay. Um, because had I not worked all those years, I wouldn't get the amount that I get now. I wouldn't have gotten credit for SSDI. Like, I know people that are my age and older that are on SSI because they didn't put taxes into the system. Either they got paid under the table, or, that's one of the issues I think with SSI is, what about a stay-at-home mom? That's working, but she's not doing like
But yeah,
it's not
like a job.
taxable work
Yeah,
income, so she's not putting into the system. Um,
right.
so and the other problem with like we should have do it. That's a whole other episode, SSI and SSDI. Like, I can live with somebody and not have my income affected, versus since SSI is income based, you can't like move in with somebody or get married or anything like that without risk of losing what you get monthly. Like, you keep your insurance, but like the financial that you get every month can be lowered or even completely taken away based on that person's income, which is discriminatory, I think. But I felt it very valuable the way she kind of described the process and described the kind of broke down like that sandwich idea. And like, I thought, they wouldn't want letters from people that you live with and all that stuff, because they would be like biased or whatever. But they really do. Like, it's nice to know how helpful that is. It makes sense. Like, I think what you're saying too is like, we're so pigeonholed and consumed by it, we can't see it from an outside perspective. So um it's also a I had no idea there was the federal level, and it's horrifying to know that people are going all the way up to that, like, to that level. um what did you
Mm.
think about, like, I still don't understand why it's been so difficult for you, because um I know what you go through on a daily basis. But I
Well,
guess that's what she's saying, is that we can't assume
they
that
don't
they
know
know.
that.
Yeah.
They can't see, and I think that has a lot to do with HIPAA. Like, people, the government can't see your how much you've gone through with your disability unless you send it to them, and it's just like, I just didn't think,
They can
and
for
I should.
this. Like, they can request their, yeah.
But I don't know if they get paid enough to do all that. That's like a lot of legwork, and it's just easier to deny people than to go through the
And if
extra
you
effort.
have like a giant file, it's a lot to go through and read, and
Yeah,
you can miss stuff.
if you send them that information, but they're not going to. I just think if I was doing this job, I would not try to go the extra mile for every case I got. I
Yeah.
can't. You can't. I can't do that. I just don't have the space, and I'm a government worker. I'm just not gonna
Well,
do my
people
9 to
think
5.
that there's like, well, it's like people thinking that the people at social services are social workers. They're not. Like when you're on food stamps and all of that, like you have a caseworker, but it's not necessarily like it's not a social worker. So like the people that are getting these initial, and filing, like you have somebody overseeing your paperwork and all of that stuff. And
Right.
like I had somebody from DARS who had actually shut my DARS case down due to disability, and she contacted the lady and is like, why the heck did she get, you know, denied? Like the girl like can barely see, because at the time I was dealing with the trigeminal and the migraines, and we didn't know what the heck was going on. And so my vision test kept coming back weird, and I had to wear sunglasses all the time. I was basically a recluse in my house. And they're like, why did she get, which I often am still, but it's like, why did she get denied? And the woman was like, well, she's worked before and she's young.
Yeah.
That's what she said. So bam, denied. Um, and
Yeah.
and that made the
No,
DARS counselor like mad. She was so mad. And she's like, you need to call Elizabeth Horn. And that's when I found my advocate. And
mm, yeah.
she's at Disability Law Center, Virginia. They no longer take cases, but she does workshops, kind of like this, kind of like help people understand
The
um
system. Yeah.
the system,
No,
because it's hard.
we need that. We need
Yeah,
that. And it's hard. And like, to even know that system exists to help you with the system is a whole thing in itself.
yeah.
Just like you don't know what your options are available to you. You don't know what you should there's no
Well,
direction.
like I would pass out, have a convulsion, have like paralysis, be vomiting.
Right.
Like my family would ice me, and then I'd wake up and go, okay, let's fill out some more paperwork.
Right.
Let's make a
It's
phone
just
call,
like
and now back
you're dealing with being disabled on top of that.
on
Here,
top
do a
of
bunch
that.
of stuff. Do a
Yeah.
bunch of superhuman stuff while you're at it.
And I think, unfortunately, when people get denied, that can almost reaffirm, like if family or loved ones or other people have any, like, like feeling that they're not really disabled, or you're not disabled enough, or you're not, I don't
Right.
believe you.
Yeah.
Then
Right.
they're like, well, the government says you're not. So, but it's not. So for those of you out there applying, listen to Adriana. Like if you got tonight, don't give up. Keep going. Just because the government said no does not mean you're not disabled. You know, make sure you have a lawyer that listens to you, that believes in you. And
Yeah.
and just seek out people like Adriana and Elizabeth Horn, that it's really a passion for them. I feel like she's so passionate about it. I think that's
Yeah.
why she's so good at it.
I mean, can you hear that?
No, is your mom making a special appearance?
No, the dog is yipping very
Oh,
loudly.
the dog is making a special guest appearance.
Yeah, she's barking at this broom. Well, I just know that when I tried to file, I kept getting denied by the law firms until I got
Yeah,
a family member involved in that. It's just like there's
yeah,
like another hurdle. Like
there is.
the law firms are free to you, but it's hard to get in even with them because they don't
When
think you're worth the trouble.
they don't think you're what, yeah, and like so many people that I've talked to, like online and support groups and stuff, they have to go through multiple law firms before one will take the case if they're in our age group. And it's
Right.
usually you're too young, it's going to be hard. And they don't want to put in the hours because they don't want to risk not.
That's the issue too. That like the system is getting the people that are sick. That group is getting bigger, and the age range is getting wider. But the
Yeah.
system in place to keep up with that, to give them disability, has stayed static and rigid.
Well, what frustrates me is like I feel like that's ageist and it's discriminatory. Like I under their thought
But
is
it
it is
makes sense that
harder.
it's ageist because the system. It's like I just think there's what's happening. I don't know. You just see the bigger picture that there's this whole medical field that isn't quite acknowledging you exist. So of course the government that functions
Yeah,
through the medical system doesn't acknowledge you exist. And you yourself are having a hard time. Like I know
acknowledging. Yeah,
with my illness, there are people as young as 16 getting it, and they're just
yeah,
like they're gonna have to go like it's just not an old people's illness anymore.
it isn't. And
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 that
there are a lot of things that aren't in old people. And I mean,
well, diabetes is a great example. Like
exactly.
diabetes
And
starts
things can happen at it. I guess what they're saying though with the age is that older people have a hard time pivoting and transitioning and learning a new skill. But I think that's
yeah.
hard, frankly, at any age. Particularly, like, let's say you did, like, go back to LaRue, like, who did manual labor his entire life and then got an accident, lost his leg, you know, and is trying to rethink, how a new skill that he can do, when his training, his education, all that whole background is manual labor, and I think it's hard for lots of people, and it's not just an age thing. You go through the shock of the disability, you go through the grieving process of the disability, you're dealing with so much shit, to be quite stuff stuff, I'll beep that.
You
So many
got
spoons.
shirts and forking issues.
Anyways, but you're dealing with so much stuff, and a lot of people also, like, some people have family support, a lot of people don't have family support. I mean, my yeah, so, or not a lot of family support, so it's very, very hard. And when you're young, this is also happening in our time. Everybody's getting married, everybody's having babies and forming their own families and learning how to, and I have a point here, I promise.
Oh
And
yeah.
so they're spending time with their families and using their energy on their families. And they may like have families that get together, and do couple dates or family group play and stuff. The disabled friend doesn't get invited along. So it's mostly, do you see, like, or they can't make the time to go and help the disabled friend because they're raising a family.
But it's
I got really jaded and dark right there.
it is jaded and dark because you're living a life that I don't think human beings were meant to do what we're doing. I
No,
don't
we
think
would have
this
died.
yeah,
We
century
would
ago
have been,
probably.
our families we would have not made it to Oregon. We would have died on
I
the
wonder
Oregon
I
Trail.
wonder if a couple of centuries ago we would have even there would have been people like I think the occurrence of disability was much rarer. It's becoming more prevalent
Or
today,
was
and
it
I
more
think
hidden? Like, and families were just
more,
taking care of you and shipping you off to like a special place. I think it's
right.
both.
We're talking about
Or we are
Roosevelt.
Rosemary, well, and Rosemary Clooney, not
Mm,
Clooney, Rosemary Kennedy. She was given a
yeah.
lobotomy and then put in a,
Oh,
that's the whole
yeah.
reason we
Yeah.
have a lot of the ADA and a lot of the stuff we have
Right.
is because her sister felt guilty from not visiting her as much as she felt that she should, and the family should have helped her more and stuff. Um,
I just always think of my disability. There was this movie with Tony Hawk when he was like a kid.
yeah,
And he had this one, they were skateboarding, and he had this one friend who was skateboarding with them, but he had developed some sort of ear issue. So he couldn't skateboard anymore. He kept falling off, like he had a balance issues because of his ear.
yeah,
And then they put his character in the film, and they would go see him, but he eventually died. I always felt like, am I that kid?
Yeah.
Like, you just feel like the world just kind of left you, they all kind of went
Yeah.
off to do their own thing, and you
To
wanted to
live
do
their
that
lives
too,
and we get left
but you
behind.
but you couldn't. Not that you didn't want to, but you couldn't. And
You
that's
couldn't.
this is way off the rails of what we're talking about with disability.
Okay. But I think
Save
talking
your
about
spoon.
disability, I think talking about disability can sometimes make, I don't know, I get emotional and I go to the dark place because it's hard. That's why I like talking to Adriana so much, because she's so passionate about what she does. She gives me faith in the system. And I know I'm one of the fortunate people my age who was able to have someone help me like Elizabeth and get disability. Um, but it still was a long and arduous process for me. And I watched my friends and loved ones fighting for it, and listening to her gives me hope for
There's,
change. Like listening to that, what they did with the Potts case. And I'm like,
yeah,
who knows
like,
if
so,
you could end up in federal court with Adriana, you know?
well, I'm in the wrong state.
She's in DC, I think. It's
Oh,
federal. Oh, it wouldn't
I
be
thought she was in
state.
Virginia. Oh, yeah, I guess, yeah, she's fed.
She's
Yeah,
a Fed. But
then
don't
anyway.
quote me on that, people, because I did not ask her that during the interview.
To whether she could represent me. It didn't come
No,
up.
that would have been awkward. No, I meant like if she only does certain states. You hush.
I have lost faith in the system, but I don't blame the system for that. I blame
Yeah,
I think the problem is too big. I
yeah.
think this whole thing is getting too big, and the system was never built to handle this level. And
But
either
I think that we gotta
something's
change
got to
it.
break. Either less people are sick, or the system needs to change, I guess, to accommodate.
Yeah,
I'd like to think I want to make people less sick, but I haven't figured out quite
I
how to
think
do that.
both need to happen. You
Yeah.
know, we need less people sick, and also from the horrible standpoint is that I'm not sure the system can handle how many people
Well,
are genuinely disabled.
could you imagine if we had a country of 100% workforce where there was no disability or geriatric, like there was no, people could just work. Like there's a lot of places that I
Are there
think
enough
are,
jobs?
we'd find the jobs. Like if, like, I just think that my dream would be like a society, not a Da Vinci society, but more like a Tesla, like just like people able to work into their old, like a longevity society. And I think that's
Yeah.
something that might be around the
Well, you
corner.
want to live forever. That for me, that's like Tuck Everlasting. That's my nightmare. Like, I do
Oh, well,
not
I wouldn't want to live
want to
forever
live forever.
disabled. I wouldn't want to live forever disabled.
I
I
would
want
want
to
to live
live
forever
forever.
healthy. Then you're
Yeah, I
like a
want to live forever.
vampire.
No, you wouldn't need to feed on the blood of the innocent.
I
You would
just
just
meant it's
live a
just
long time.
so long. I don't know. I think I would get bored eventually, or that's for
Well,
another day.
if I ever get bored, I'll kill myself. But just like if I just think, do you ever see the show The Sandman?
Oh
That
no,
was
that's on
based
my
on
list. You keep yelling at me. It's on my list.
there's a guy in that they give him immortality, and he pretty much he lives, and he has his up times and his bad times, but he never wants to die because living is so incredible.
Wonderful. Yeah.
Right. I
There's
think
so
I
much I
don't
want to do. I don't want
even
to, you're right.
even disabled, I love the idea that I can be sad and happy, and that breadth of emotion. Like you don't, once you're dead, you don't feel any of that anymore, and you're just dead. And it's just like, I feel like this whole gift of existence is amazing.
It really is. It really, and I think we should end there because that was beautiful. I think every day we wake up, we choose because it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And the lesson I'm really taking from this episode is don't give up.
Don't
Do
give up,
not
no
give up.
surrender.
Never surrender. And
there
you're
was
not alone. You are not alone. And hey, you can always write into us. We can send questions. But like I said, we're gonna have her back. And if there are things you want to hear in a future episode with Adriana about disability, please let us know. Go to our website, www.speakinginspoons, and you can email us at speakinginspoons@gmail.com. And save your spoons, guys.
save those mother forking spoons.
If you want to contact us, please send a DM or email to speakinginspoons@gmail.com with any stories you have or would like to interview with us on any of our upcoming topics. And check out our website for all of our upcoming episodes and what's happening in the Speaking in Spoons community at www.speakinginspoons.com. Thank you for listening to Speaking in Spoons, and have a great day.